Hi, I'm Alan Gershenfeld. I also come from a background in video games and movies and education. They asked me to talk a little bit about a broader view of how the world might shape AR and VR, because there'll be a lot of forces that will affect what you do that you may not be in control of. VR is amazing at taking you somewhere else and immersing you in something else, whether it's the ocean, whether it's space, whether it's fantasy. AR is amazing at taking where you are and bringing it to life in newly interesting ways. But if you follow that logic and you put incredibly talented people who are very good for designing for behavior change and return on capital and don't care about kids and don't care about impact, you might get a world a little bit like this. Some of you may have seen this. Do you want to click?
Yeah.
So if you haven't seen this, this is sort of...
Estoy presente ahora. Veo. Estoy libre de mi ira. Estoy libre de mi tristeza. El amor es mi esperanza.
Habla español. Adiós. Hola, me llamo María.
So you get the idea that, if you want to augment everything about you, and there are folks that are really good at design and behavior change, that may be the world that we end up in. And that's going to have an enormous impact on kids, no matter what you design. And it's something to think about. What is the logic of these technologies? Where might it go? What are the probable, and then what are the preferable futures? The fact is, when you look at most of the popular media, that video has made multiple laps around the internet, millions of views. It's worth watching. There's kind of a provocative twist at the end, if you haven't seen it. But if you think about VR and AR in popular media, it's mostly dystopian. And kids are reading a lot of dystopian futures. And that impacts the future of how we all visit, what we see, the mental and emotional maps of the future is often what we build. And we are lacking aspirational but achievable futures in popular media. So it's another outward influence when we think about the future. In a lot of the augmented realities and even in the virtual realities, if it is so immersive and engaging, the real world becomes less interesting. What does that mean? I'm going to talk a little bit about Minority Report. This is a movie that came out around 2000, Steven Spielberg. And when they made that movie, they actually didn't have the screenplay for a variety of reasons. And so Spielberg, the director, and the writer Scott Frank, and the production designer Alex McDowell, who's a business partner of mine on a new business, they had to design the world of Washington, D.C. in 2044 before they had the script. And they brought a lot of experts, including some folks from ASU, MIT, really interesting experts. And they looked holistically at the world. They built the world, and then they told the story within the world. As a result, things like gesture-based controls, AR, context-sensitive advertising, driverless cars, many, many things were first visualized. They existed, but they first visualized in the movie. Inventors then turned them into businesses. It's pretty well known for that. And the process of doing that was really provocative, especially for Alex. So he actually, even though he's done a lot of big movies since then, he's been teaching at USC this practice of world building, where when imagining future worlds and actually designing and building them and telling stories to challenge those worlds, you have to look at the whole world holistically. And that raises an interesting question for this conference, which is, how will AR and VR, not how will we shape it, that's critical, but how will it be shaped by forces outside our control, and how much can we start to think about those and get ahead of the curve on those? So, this would be a much longer conversation. I'm happy to talk about it offline, but we use this kind of mandala to dive into different processes of world building. And since I only have about 4 minutes, I'm going to just go to a domain and a subdomain that I think is relevant to the conversation this afternoon. So these are trends in the game industry, and I think it's important as a subdomain to look at the game industry. So this came up, I think, with Jason and a couple other people. In mobile games right now, it's a free-to-play economy. In China, it's a free-to-play economy. Largely, the game industry is going to a free-to-play economy. A lot of the business models are predatory and really complex behavior change going on. So that's going to be, when you guys talk about business models and sustainability models, you have to look at some of this stuff. Anybody who's put up an app on the App Store understands, Sarah's nodding there, we've been through it as well. You got to understand these trends and economics and either thinking about how to make them parent-friendly or thinking about new models, because new models are out there. There's there's powerful tools. Unity is here, Unreal. These tools are democratizing creation, which is wonderful. But with millions of people creating things, how do you find them? How does discovery happen? Who are the middle companies that are deciding what you see and what you don't see, and algorithmically and curatorially how they're prioritizing it? That has a huge impact on what parents and kids will see. That brings us to international. Very quietly, a company called Tencent is buying up most of the game industry. They own a bunch of Epic, Unreal. They own a bunch of Activision. They own Riot Games. A fascinating company, but this is an international world that we're living in, and this will affect the products and services you do and how you bring them to people. And it's important to understand that. The crazy phenomenon of Fortnite and Battle Royale. What does that mean for sort of multiplayer live gaming? And how does that cross over in a good or bad way to VR? I mean, I actually think one of the great opportunities in VR goes back to board games. It's like multiplayer family games. There's some really interesting examples there. But these trends, esports is another trend. Parents are going to struggle with elementary school kids that want to be professional gamers. If there's going to be a lot of bounce back, it is already happening. These are trends I think you need to look at. I think we can zoom back even one step further, and this could be a much, much bigger slide, but these are just a handful of technology trends, accelerating technology trends that will impact AR and VR, even if it's not obvious. Some of them are more obvious, some are less obvious. I mean, really interesting things are happening with blockchain and distributed ledger in terms of sort of chain of title of how things get adapted and modded and sold in secondary markets. I would watch that very closely. Believe me, the game industry is, and doing interesting things. We worked on a very interesting project with DARPA and MIT on this intersection of bits and atoms. So things that you can design in VR, you can physically fabricate. So you're literally going from a world of bits to the world of atoms. You see Hasbro's here and some of the other toy companies, the virtual play and the real world play and the physical goods. A lot of people are playing at that intersection. What does that mean for VR and AR? Very interesting, very interesting trends. Obviously things like infrastructure and AR and VR divides and digital divides, these are going to have huge implications. So, I mean, my goal is really just to scratch the surface of, as you think about preferable futures for AR and VR, I think you got to zoom back and look at some of the broad trends that are going to shape the future, where we individually and collectively have agency to shape them, and where we have to adapt them. Thanks.